Telefilm Canada champions independent storytelling in Canada that is sustainable and inclusive. We are inspired by Indigenous creators on the value of connecting story, land, and language, and of protecting our natural world. Our commitment is to work through the lens of sustainability in all we do. As an investor, a promoter, a financial administrator, and as an employer, we will make positive change and reduce our impact by encouraging knowledge sharing, working in partnership with the industry to implement best practices, establishing science-based targets, and measuring our carbon footprint. With tools like our modernized budget template that now includes sustainability and EDI priorities and our sustainability plan template requirement, we strive to encourage sustainable productions. Together, we can build a sustainable and future-facing film industry.
I want to thank you for joining us today, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's panel on insights for environmentally sustainable filmmaking. And, it's also great that we're having this discussion, and I want to thank our panelists that are with us to share their insights so that we can all collectively learn and grow and support and implement impactful solutions for upcoming productions. And for those of you who don't know, Telefilm is a public funder dedicated to the development, funding, and promotion of Canadian films and its creators. We know right now that the screen content industry in Canada and around the world is taking meaningful action to reduce its carbon footprint and also to minimize environmentally damaging practices. Telefilm is committed to this transformative journey and participating in these important conversations on sustainability efforts and what content creators can do to reduce your carbon footprint of their productions. We continue to be inspired by Indigenous perspectives, and they remind us that story and land and language are fundamentally interconnected. As a responsible leader and champion in Canadian audiovisual industry, Telefilm Canada commits itself to eco-responsibility and, as the presentation said, as a lens through which we work so that we can evolve and optimize our actions and ensure that our screen-based industry is moving towards greener practices, which is why I'm wearing this suit. To support this, we launched our eco-responsibility action plan a little over a year ago. And moving forward, successful production companies receiving Telefilm funding will be required to provide us with the sustainability plan. The template is going to be on our website. It will be mandatory as a deliverable. And to also help producers, we've created a sustainability plan budget. And we're hoping that this will also help you to reflect and track all the expenses for more eco-responsible production. And as we always know with this business, collaboration is key. And when it comes to accelerating the pace to fight climate change and to further our conversations today, please meet our moderator, Elisa, Suppa, Senior Advisor to Corporate Projects and Research at Telefilm. Please enjoy this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Meredith. So before we start, I'll just do a quick bio on each of our esteemed guests. And they have a very rich resume of storytelling, so I encourage you to visit them on their respective websites. So starting on my far left is Tyler Hagan. He has a film year at TIFF this year, SEAGRASS, so I encourage you all, if you haven't seen it, to please look out for it. Tyler, his last 5 features have all been at TIFF, so kudos to that. And one of his most notable was The Body Remembers When the World Broke Open, which won the Toronto Film Critics Award. And he is also now beginning to do work as a director as well, as I understand. And next to him is Félize Frappier, and thank you. She came especially from Montreal for this conversation, so thank you. And I know you have a film coming out next year or early next year, Azimut, which was actually part of a special case study on sustainability practices, so hopefully you can bring some of that into it. I also wanted to mention that two of Tyler's films are also part of this study that we're going to be discussing. Then we have Daniel Bekerman, who is a very active and prolific producer in Canada. I think I read in his bio that he's produced at least 30 films in the last 10 years. And that includes not only as a creative producer, but as in international co-production, as a financier, foreign location shooting. And you have also a film here at TIFF, The Dead Don't Hurt, Viggo Mortensen's film, which is, I think today is going to be...
Don't Hurt premiere on Friday. Actually, the movie with Elliot Page is premiering in an hour.
Okay, so you have two then. So thank you for being here. I know that he's very dedicated to sustainability, so we're here to learn from you as well. And our expert here is Andrew Robinson, who's with Reesbark Group. He's a sustainability expert, and he works with various clients, including Telefilm, on developing sustainable strategies. And his focus is really in the last 20 years to make our production practices more mindful, respectful, and sustainable. So the way we're going to structure the conversation is Andrew will show us just highlights of the presentation, the research that he's conducted. That'll take about 5 or 6 minutes, and then we're going to launch into a conversation with our producers. So, Andrew?
Great. So very thanks to all of you for coming today. I'm really excited to be able to share this with you, and thanks to Telefilm for commissioning this work in the first place. So the idea behind this work is that there's a number of reports that are out there that talk about the environmental impact and the carbon footprint of film production, television production in various jurisdictions, but there wasn't anything that was specific to Canada's geographic reality or budgetary realities. So Telefilm wanted to commission something that captured, what are the practices that are happening in Canada and how films are being produced and television series are being produced, and what can we learn from them and how do they relate or not to other Asians. So I'm not the storyteller, but I'll endeavor to tell a story here, and it's going to be obviously supplemented by the fact that 3 of the films that are, and the producers that are here today supplemented some of the work that's here, and so they can tell you specifically about some of the practices and the actions that they implemented that fed into the data here. Because right now you're gonna see a lot of numbers. So these were the parameters of the study. We've got about a sample of 22 productions, total of about 140 hours of content. So that's a robust and meaningful enough sample size to be able to give us some strong indications of patterns of habits and impact areas. It's not definitive conclusions, but it's definitely strong indicators, and we're very confident with what it's telling us. We looked at budget ranges that were in alignment with CMPA's annual profile report, so that ranged from 500,000 to over 5 million. And we also went across all regions of Canada. Again, the distribution of the productions that participated in the study was pretty much in alignment with the active distribution of productions in the various regions of Canada. So that we're happy with that alignment. And the genres that were up there are everything from fiction, documentary, lifestyle, and variety. This does not include things like children's or animation or in-house broadcasting. So this first slide is giving us the average emissions per content hour. And what's important to talk about by content hours, because that's the comparator. Every film has a different budget, different crew size, different region. But how you can compare it is if you look by hour of production, what were the average carbon emissions related to that. So, and Canadian household ranges between 3.5 to 4.3 tons per year for its energy consumptions. If you look here, even at the low end of the spectrum, in the having the data height, but in the lowest budget ranges of under 500,000, even in that budget category, per hour of content, it's more than double. It's about 2.5 times the annual consumption rate of a Canadian household. That consumption rate goes from 10 and increases all the way to 67 in terms of emissions per content hour when you go over to the above the $5 million budget range. So that tells us that there's a linear relationship between emissions rate and budget. That does not necessarily mean that to be more sustainable, to be more environmental, you have to lower your budget. It just means that you have to look at where you're spending that money, where is it really emissions intensive, and to decouple your spending with that emissions intensivity. So one of the areas where we're seeing here is where the emissions are coming from is travel and transportation. That's well over 50% in most of the cases. I'll go into a little bit more detail about the travel and transportation in the future slide. We also have, in some cases here, material consumption is a pretty notable category. There's a little bit at the top, the purple there is non-filming spaces. That's a little bit, and that's where in Canada we have, that's where the diesel generators fall into place. Diesel generators, at least in the Canadian productions that we were part of the study, are used primarily for like temporary offices, your trailers, your base camp. And so the fuel that's consumed in those generators. So we could go to the next slide. If we look at therefore the average emissions of feature film per content hour, we see that obviously fiction's emissions are far greater than documentary. That makes sense. Greater crew, more materials are involved, and potentially a longer production cycle as well. In both cases, well over 50% of the emissions are coming from travel and transportation. That's not the case for documentary, obviously over 83%. It makes sense, right? That the emissions for documentaries is primarily how we're moving around. And for fiction, well over a quarter, or about a quarter, is from our material consumption. If we go to the next slide. So what do we mean by travel and transportation? Now this slide isn't the per hour. This is looking at the total emissions for all of our budgets. We think so on average, all of the production methods in Canada have almost 60% travel and transportation. We're a big country. We tend to think that that's probably coming from air transportation, but it's only about 21%. Largely, it's 69% is from the way that we're moving around in our gas-powered vehicles. So how are we getting to location? Our materials, our people, how often are we going back and forth? That's really where the majority of our emissions are coming from in Canada. That's distinct from other regions in the world where about half of the emissions were coming actually from generators, or certainly not as much from gas-powered vehicles. So that's an interesting conversation for us to have and look at how are we planning to move around. In terms of our material consumption, it's largely coming from food. And so I think some of our producers here on the panel will be able to tell you a little bit about why that is and what are the options and opportunities that they pursue to reduce the impact there. It was far less than from lumber and wood that you get from other regions of the world. Textiles is also a little over 30%. Okay, so if we go to the next slide. So what we did is we also wanted to get a sense of not just for the sample sizes, but what does this mean for industry? So we extrapolated, we looked at our sample size, and we looked at the total number of productions over per year over the last 5 years in Canada, and we extrapolated to have like a Canadian industry impact. So for feature film, we saw that we have about an annual impact, about 5,000 tons per year for our productions. And so that's about 1,500 cars that would be driving constantly for a year, or the emissions rate of almost 1,200 homes per year. For television series, we're going well over 1 million tons per year for the way that we are producing our television series. And again, in both cases, you see transportation over half, and materials is a notable contributor. So the key takeaways, and then the final slide for this is how are we planning for our productions to take place? Are there opportunities for us during the planning phase to think about how we are moving to places? Do we need to go to those locations as often as we do? Can we carpool? Can we use electric vehicles? Can we use hybrids? Can we take a train instead? Can we use local crews there instead of having to ship everybody there? There's all kinds of things that we can look at. We have just about every solution that we want to be more sustainable exists today. And a lot of the producers here will be able to speak about what are some of those solutions. But they require us to use the planning phase to think about what is it that I want to consume in terms of materials? How do I want to move people around? Does it need to be in this way? Does this shot need to happen in this location? Does it need to have a vehicle? What are the opportunities for me to think about, do I need fuel or do I need power? Like, how can I access the power that I need to get the shot that's required? And how does my budget support that decision-making process?
Okay, thank you. Andrew, that's a lot of really good information and a really solid basis to have the conversation. Now, I have to tell you, back in the green room, these producers didn't need me to help in the conversation. There was a lot of excellent ideas and things that they're doing individually, and actually some of them work together. So I'm just going to start off, and you can take it, Félize. In terms of your planning, what goes into your thought processes when you are planning your production? Does it start in pre-production? And you mentioned some tools that you yourself were looking to develop. So if you can help.
Well, for me, it's really part of my values. So I think we're producing as we are. And I think you need to think about it right now. You need, within your company, to do a guide of actions of what you can do on your feature films. And then in preparation, there's a really big need to communicate it to the team, and not by emails, because we have too many emails. And also, it's really about everything that you prepare in advance. It really makes it easier afterwards throughout the film. And also what we did, which I think is really important right now, because I think we're still in a phase where it's all about education and also demystifying that it's not that hard. I think the idea is that you're not going to be perfect. You need to do all the small things you can think of and everything that is possible. And that altogether, it in a sense, it makes a big difference. And at the end, what we did is that we made a questionnaire just to say, okay, so what did you anticipate at the beginning and how was it at the end? And everybody was saying how it was less complicated than they thought. And of course, we had like really good allies on our movie set that would always help the eco manager that was with us to really guide everyone towards it, because it's not everyone that will have the same. How do you say, when everybody is tired, then it changes. So then we have like those allies that are kind of leaders on the set as well that were helping us. Okay, but it's really about thinking about it in advance.
So I'm just to point out, you had an eco sustainability advisor on your set?
Yeah, so we were really lucky because it was a Telefilm case study. And the idea was to see what's the footprint of a regular film going in 4 different regions. So we were traveling a lot. And even at the beginning, our eco manager was saying to us, you're doing a lot of eco actions, so we need to, calculate a regular film. And we were like, yes, but we did that before COVID. So it's just to bring back the crews to do different things. And so there are a few things that we didn't impose that I could impose on future films. But for this one, like, let's say we'll talk about it, but like catering, we couldn't make it like 100% vegetarian, but we were up to 47%. So that's like examples. But the idea was really to calculate a regular feature film, and in that sense, we were lucky to have someone that would really help us. To have someone, of course, it cost. And especially because we were traveling, it meant we had to accommodate her, all the travel. So she was there a lot in the preparation with us every day. She was in all the, the statutory meetings every week. So, and she had meetings with all the departments to see what they could do. And she would really be there to kind of help and answer everything. So what are your fears? Okay, I'll find solutions. So it was really proactive. Okay. And I think it really helped the crew to demystify how we can do it.
Okay, so there's a lot of openness and flexibility. That's what I'm hearing, that you need to to do this. And Tyler, now 2 of your productions were very sustainably conscious. So do you want to talk about maybe some perceptions or misperceptions and some of the benefits you saw for your crew?
Yeah, for sure. So the 2 films that was filming last summer, SEAGRASS, which is here, the festival, and a film called The Nidia, which Dan was also an executive producer on. Both participated in the study and provided data to Andrew and his team. And I also see that my good friend Natch, who is the line producer on Nidia, is in the back here, and he was very instrumental in executing our plan. We kind of came together as a film team on Inidia and identified, sustainable production as a very important thing to all of the key team members. So we decided, we'd do everything we could to make the film as sustainable as possible. And one of the things we identified was, there's this certification called the Albert certification, which is out of the UK, which is kind of like a bit of like a rubber stamp thing. You do the process, and it calculates how much carbon your production was responsible for, and if you have done things well enough, they give you like the certification that you can put it in the credits, which was a really good process. Mostly, it's fine to have a rubber stamp thing. They can be complicated, complex. Sometimes they're just greenwashing a little bit, but the best thing that came out of that was actually just being forced to account for everything that you've done and be able to go through that inventory in every department and look at things and see where really our impact is coming from, which is also why this study is so useful, because now we have information that we can take and we can say, okay, this isn't the same as in other jurisdictions. Like, we are just, emitting a lot from driving around. So, which is pretty obvious, I think, but it's good to be, to have that actual information confirmed. So this film was shot on Salt Spring Island off the west coast of BC, and we were very lucky that the project itself aligned with this goal of sustainability. So the main location for the film was kind of like a commune. It's where this character kind of goes to and gets sucked into a really weird community, which is a side story, a side thing. But so we shot at this retreat center on the island, and it was actually happened to be an organic farm, and so all of our catering was 100% vegetarian. A lot of it coming directly, well, not a lot, but a good portion of the actual food itself was coming directly from the farm. So there was, really, really local and all organic food. And so that was something that was like an easy integration for that film in particular. We had, because as you're talking about with planning, it's the same thing with any part of making a film, is that if you have a value, then you can put it in place. And if you plan for it in prep, then you can execute it during the production, which is the same thing as the shots you want to get. So we made it a point for ourselves to make this a really big part of our film. And I also want to give credit to Jennifer Chu, who was the other producer on the film, who really spearheaded this. And so what we did was we made sure that we got buy-in from everybody, every single person on the cast and crew. When we were talking to them about the project, do you want to be involved? We're going to have vegetarian meals. We're going to be, carpooling at every opportunity we can. We're not going to be coming here and going there and using electric generators. We had a wonderful partnership with William F. White's, who provided electric generators for us, and some of the more high-end lights that don't require as much power but are usually too expensive for a indie feature to afford. So they were a really wonderful partner for us, and that was the kind of thing that planning can afford, because if you just go into those things at the last minute and start begging your gear providers to give you the most expensive stuff, it's going to be pretty hard. But we developed, that process and talked to them for a long time about it, and they got on board, which was amazing. And yeah, so that was like the experience with that film, and I think it was a really big success, and it was mostly down to planning.
Well, thank you. That's really interesting. And turn to you, Dan. I know in the green room you were connecting all of these day-to-day actions to sort of bigger commitments we need to make as an industry. And I think at one point we used the example of how we mobilized for COVID and what could we do and what can we learn from how we mobilized from COVID. So if you want to...
Yeah, my God, it's a huge topic. So, I mean, like I'm a very busy producer now, but I started as a production assistant, sweeping floors, volunteering, and the reason I bring that up is I also took out the garbage, and I saw what was in the garbage on a film set, and the water bottles, the food waste. You learn a lot taking out the garbage about this subject. And thinking back to that, and I have, gone on a kind of journey. Actually, I had the privilege of making a movie about climate change for over a decade. I worked on it, and I was in climate conferences. I was in Paris for the climate summit there. And many other climate conferences, met with environmental leaders around the world. It was just a privilege to just have a window into what's actually happening. And so that kind of pushed me, even like I was naturally kind of open to the issue, but now I feel a tremendous urgency. And in building this company that I have built over the last 15 years or so, I have been conscious of how to make it more sustainable, and thinking back to the kind of garbage I took out. So, there's certain things I've been trying to do for years, doing my best, sometimes against the wishes of some of the crew, to do things like no water bottles on set. Shouldn't be that hard, but you'd be surprised how much resistance there is. I'm vegetarian, which is certainly one of the, in terms of overall carbon footprint, actions an individual can take, is certainly one of the most impactful. And the idea of having vegetarian food for crew is really interesting. I just learned that James Cameron mandates vegan food on his shows, and he can't mandate anything he wants, of course. So it's not necessarily a way for us to go forward, just using him as an example. But these are good ideas. And in India, that Tyler and Notch back there were really, along with Jen, were the leaders of making that honestly probably the most sustainable production I've ever been involved in, and I think it is really great and really inspiring. One question I had for you actually was: did you ever, in the audit, in sort of in the reporting, and is it a part of that process to actually talk about the cost differentials of the methodologies that you use, like the electric batteries? And you had help specifically from William F. White's and things like that, so maybe that all offset any cost differential. But did you ever do an analysis of that?
No, there wasn't really any analysis in the process of like cost differentials. It was basically, you're inputting information and they're taking everything and making it into a carbon emission like equivalent, similar to I think how this study is also formatted, I guess. But as far as like, we were talking about this before as well, like the cost of implementing sustainable practices, I don't think it's a major cost for productions to do it. I think it just requires labor. It requires us to do work, and I think that's what it was really interesting when you were talking about the coordinator that you had hired was able to take. The reason why crew members get resistant to things is because it means that they are going to have more work to do, right? You're asking them to do more than they would typically do. So if you've got somebody there that can help and figure out, problem solve, then that sounds like, it lessens the load for everybody else. It smooths over the added work. So, I mean, I just think that was, one of the things that made it work.
Did you want to comment?
Yeah, I want to comment. I think we also need to change our relation to time in a way, because everything is about time, because we're talking about cost, but then it's time. And I think that's something to plan ahead as well, because it takes time. And so it's just an example, but to cook good vegetarian meals takes more time. It takes more vegetables. It takes more textures. You need to put flavors. You need to. So in a way, if you want your crew to like the food, because I think we really have to do like a mindset changing that is like a big change, radical change to make it work. Well, we kind of have to think about our relationship with time.
I think that's an excellent point. And the status quo of that relationship is that time is money. Exactly. And so that is radical to change that. But yeah, I mean, like, I do different kinds of work. I do some work with Telefilm. I do some Canadian work. I also do some work that's more based with working with studios, streamers, like I've worked on movies with Disney, Netflix. And overall, I've, had probably close to $500 million of business over the last like 7 or 8 years. So like a lot of money. And what I get passionate about this issue, the intersection of sustainability and the film industry, is just what I've seen from those experiences is that big money doesn't change unless it has to. Just being real about it, like if something's going to cost one of those corporations $10 more, they're probably not going to do it. And I think it's wonderful what we're talking about here, and this is necessary. And I commend Telefilm for mandating these changes and this accountability through the reporting. I think that's excellent. But I also would love to see how it can connect to the larger industry in ways that actually, like, all us good intentioned producers, here's a metaphor: Niagara Falls. That's the money. You can be as well intentioned as you want. You can't swim up Niagara Falls. This is going to be a large engineering project to actually go the other direction, and it requires monetary incentives. So I would love to see how these very good intentions and mandates can be married with all of the other tools that the industry uses, which are not all in Telefilm's domain. But
what kind of tools?
The monetary incentive tools.
Tax credits.
That's what moves the direction of Niagara Falls.
Okay.
Whether it's tax credits, whether it's grants, equity investments, that's when big money pays attention, because it has to. And I have good intentions, I think, on the environment. I want to be more sustainable, but I'm a little teeny corporation. You have to force me to do this stuff, despite my good intentions, let alone all the people who don't care at all. So I would love to see a conversation that integrates this great data. I found that fascinating, that the data you've got integrates that information with what the government says they want to do, tackling climate change. And that's where, over the course of making that documentary about climate change, I saw the gap. All the talk, industry and government, the government still doesn't quite want to confront the industries in ways that hurt at all. And we have to hurt a little to really address this unbelievably massive issue we're all facing. Come on.
Andrew, I saw you wanted to comment.
Yeah, I'd like to say a quick note on incentives and then on costs. On the cost things, is like things will cost more if we don't plan well. And so they've all talked about how they planned, and then they were able to achieve not only emissions reductions, but cost savings. And if you tell your caterer, if you have a caterer, like, this is your budget, make it vegetarian, it hasn't cost you anything, whether, you just told them, this is what I want you to feed us. If you set a zero waste goal, we worked on a production, they had a 2-week production schedule, it was a tiny budget, they had set a zero waste goal for themselves. After 2 weeks, they had half a bag of garbage because they thought about it and they planned for it. That didn't cost them anything right? So there's a lot of stuff that you can do that doesn't cost. There are things that do cost things, and you have to think about how you can offset that if you're getting more expensive new clean technology, but it's not burning gas, you're saving on gas. Is it offsetting that cost? So how are you thinking about your budget holistically to really allow for that decision making to happen? In terms of incentives, to Dan's point, is right, and it's really tiny incentives are enough to really move the dial. In Vancouver, they've got it's a 500, actually it's just gone up to $600. $600, so they take $600 off your daily film permit if you show that by filming on location, you're removing at least one diesel generator. So that's not a lot, and that you're talking about like a lot of foreign service productions in Vancouver. They have millions and millions of dollars of budget, and talking about $600 savings. They've been stampeding towards that incentive, right? And really changing their practices around Vancouver. In Italy, the Ministry of Culture has added a €5,000 supplement. If you submit the sustainability plan and the final carbon footprint at the end, we'll give you an extra €5,000. They had an 80% uptake of productions pursuing sustainable activities because of €5,000. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it's plenty enough to incentivize. So it really doesn't take much for government to kind of throw in some incentives and for the industry to respond.
I totally agree, and you can start small like that. I think it could grow to be more than that, especially when you're dealing with the big companies, but starting small like that, I totally agree, yeah.
Talking about, you brought in international, you referenced Italy. When you're talking to potential producing partners internationally or nationally, does this conversation arise? Is there something that makes another producer appealing if they are more sustainably minded? Is it part of, does a buyer or a commissioning editor ever ask you these questions about what's your story and are you greening your story? Or should that be part of the creative process? Anyone can take it?
For sure should be. I don't believe that's the world we live in.
Okay.
I think all those decisions are about money and nothing else. When it comes to buyers, that's the reality. There's been waves on different issues of industry doing what I would call virtue signaling on that issue and on other issues of diversity. But then when the Instagram pictures have been posted, how much are they actually backing up what they're saying they're doing? I don't see much.
Okay, but I see Félize was going to comment on what you were saying.
No, more on your question,
Okay.
but it's also to say internationally, because we were discussing it before, but I never got like a sales agent or like a buyer saying, is your story more green? Like we never got that. But what we do here more and more is really when we're choosing our co-production partners, there's like the desire that we would have like a tag where it's clear that this is something that is important for us and co-produce within people that are thinking about it. So that's a kind of circle that is starting. But
because I at a panel yesterday with one of my colleagues that we were discussing Urimage and the funding they give. Sustainability, sustainable practices does come up in sort of the matrix somehow of assessing a project. Tyler, you were going to...
Well, I think that, also to Dan's point is that it's these things do have to be top down to a certain degree. So there has to be incentives that come from like very large institutions, very large corporations, in order for us to get the kind of scale that we need. Like our little film was like $2 million. And it was great that we did what we were able to do because we were able to say that we did everything we could to make the film as sustainable as possible. But it's not, it's a drop in Niagara Falls, so it's nothing. And in order to actually really, really do something about this, we need to have, like Telefilm's starting to do, we need to have all the large institutions working together to to make the path clear for everybody to take. And, you know, I know that CBC has also created a carbon calculator. So there's tools that are starting to exist for people to do the work. But yeah, if your image, for instance, is starting to mandate things or incentivize them, then producers will start doing them. Because at the end of the day, we're just, you know, all that we do in our job is just like squirrel around and look for where we can get the money. Like that's what our job is. It's just like, okay, I can get money there, and there. Maybe, okay, these people want to partner and we can get a bit more money for the film. Like, great. Like, honestly, everybody, every industry, you just kind of, you follow the resources, right?
But you're doing it creatively, so.
Yes, of course.
I just got a note that we have 15 minutes left, so I just want to stop for a minute to see if there's questions from the floor. Otherwise, we can continue asking the panel questions. Does anyone have questions they'd like to ask some of the producers or the expert? Yes, I see someone at the back. Sorry, if you can wait for the microphone, please, thank you.
Hi, thanks. Thanks everyone for coming today and speaking about sustainability. As a filmmaker, I try to pride it to make sure that everybody's doing as much as we can so we can still have jobs in the future. And talking about finding eco-officers, is there sort of like a regulation to that? How do you find that? How do you go about having people on your production that'll be going around? Because it's like when you're in North Bay doing a night shoot and people need water. Sometimes I find that's hard, but I know that people who will go around and be like, are you thirsty? Let me fill up your water bottle. But how do you go around finding someone who's going to be dedicated to the production on set?
Do any of the producers want to?
I think maybe an example we can use as a guide for that question is intimacy coordinators, which are something that have been introduced into the industry quite recently, and it's now quite pervasive. Because it was recognized there was a problem, and so it's a profession that emerged very quickly. And the one key thing to think about in regards to comparing that to a sustainability officer is it's integrated with ACTRA. It's integrated with the union. And it's a little bit of a gray area in terms of how much they're mandated, but it's become common practice really quickly. I'd love to see that same thing with sustainability officers, and I think you could look to some of the way that evolved in terms of alignment with unions, the mandate of needing to have one is integrated in a number of ways.
In one of the current positions, production coordinator or something like that, or?
Yeah, that's a great way to kind of make it a part of the industry in a way that's harder to get rid of it.
Elisa, you were going to comment?
Also, I think exactly the same way. I think it will develop really quickly. Right now, there's not like, let's say, a company where you can go and there's people that are specialized and that can help you. But let's say in Quebec, we have l'INIS, which is doing a lot of workshop, and they're really trying to inform. I think it's really to get informed. But then I think a bit like the coordinators, you can really have anybody that has the same set of values that can help you with that. And that, let's say, for the guide that we are doing at my own company right now, it's like 15 pages of actions that you can do. And once you've put down on a paper, like it's really just simple, and once you think about it, then you can really share it. And I think sharing is a key element in what we're trying to do, because it's collective, and then it can really be a lot of people. But of course, there's a lot of education right now. And let's say like our eco manager was good for us because whenever we were traveling in each city, it was different. So we had to really contact the cities and see how can we work together. And we had to do a deal with like all the, how do you say, the
like the
eco
waste,
center. Yeah. So I mean, again, it comes back to preparation. And what we did is that we had the eco manager, and then I had someone within my office that was really the go-to person whenever there was a question, because I mean, I have all those ideas, but I didn't do it myself every day. So it was really to have people where all questions could be addressed.
And I just want to say that there's also provincial resources. I'm looking at my colleagues from Ontario Green Screen. I think each province has resources. There's training available that is mostly free. So there's ways that won't be a burden. I'm addressing to the person who asked the question. There's ways you can maybe access some resources and information from the provinces as well.
And in Quebec, we have Rolling Green.
Yes,
and right now they are translating their website. So soon all the tools will be in both languages.
Yeah, and Quebec is an accreditation for green filming, which is, I think they were the first to do so. Were you going to comment, or?
Yeah, just to say that, to add on that, there's lots of free resources and training that are available out there. But if you need someone on set, I mean, there are actually organizations where you can actually go and if you have the budget for it, including my company, but
you can't plug yourself, Andrew.
If you have, but I'd say that outside of that, the important thing is actually to work with a knowledgeable expert to actually train the crew to be able to make the decisions. And so if you're in North Bay, they're equipped themselves. You don't have to rely on an external expert. That's the ideal scenario that you want to be able to build with. So maybe getting that planning phase, and what do we need to get external expertise during that planning phase so we can build in the knowledge within our crew when we're in location to be asking the questions that we need to be asking.
Yeah, and it's like, you build it into the workflow of everything, right? So when you go on your location scout or your tech scout, then whoever's responsible for waste and everything is asking about that. And we didn't have anybody on our film that was like a dedicated sustainability person because we just didn't have the budget. But we, basically we put it onto every department that, this is now part of your responsibility. And, obviously for locations, it's a big responsibility of dealing with waste. And so they integrated as best they could. Obviously they were sorting out the waste, but then, figuring out where that's going to go. And, when you're working on an island, it's a different situation. They don't have, the massive recycling center that you have in the big cities. So it's a different thing, but that's exactly what you're saying about just like learning, putting it as part of the process, part of the planning, and getting that local knowledge and everything you need.
One thing I wanted to mention, you mentioned the thing about COVID. Yeah, like this is a pretty small industry overall. Like video games are twice the size of the film industry. But when it counts, we're an incredible. We can move mountains in this industry. Like COVID is a good example.
Right.
Within a matter of weeks, we figured out an entirely new department, how to communicate it to everyone, which was a brand new thing, and basically created a wing of an industry in literally in weeks. And we move fast and we move decisively, and we're also very visible. So we're a great industry to be at the forefront of sustainability. And I just think that there's so many ways that you can see with a little more oomph. This planning, this discussion is great, but with a little more monetary oomph from government bodies. And I agree, it doesn't necessarily need to be gigantic amounts of money. Things like you mentioned the battery, like William F. White's working with you on battery power on Anidia. I've seen those battery power generators. They're cool, but they're expensive. Yeah. And, most movies are just not going to spend the extra money on them.
And the crew doesn't necessarily want to, it's new,
they might
right?
need some training,
and it's not necessarily what they are used to or what they think they need. And
the fruit is right there for the picking. We need to incentivize the use of something like that. It's obvious.
Training and of the crew is critical. That's
training and balancing out the cost differential.
Okay.
So it's at hand. We can do that, kind of make that kind of change, but it does need to be top integrated with the very top level.
Okay. Do we have time for? Oh, okay. I think we know you. Would you like to ask a question, Dave?
I would. Do you want? I can do a better mic. I'm sorry.
You were just talking about William F. White, and there you go.
Well, not anymore.
Sunbelt.
But I'm glad Dan brought that up, because that was going to be my comment to the producers on the panel, is that when it comes to technology, lower emission technology and sustainable technology, it's very much a supply and demand kind of scenario. If there's a demand, there will be a supply. And the equipment houses aren't R&D houses. They're not innovators. They wait for a message from the industry, from the market, that they want a product, and then the supply houses will go out and get the product. Something that happened in Vancouver a few years ago was a questionnaire out to a bunch of producers saying, would you use electric vehicles if there is a fleet of them in the community? And they had such an overwhelming response that the providers, Driving Force and Hertz and National and everyone else, they had to go out and get more electric vehicles. Now, of course, there are supply chain issues all over the world that is slowing that down. But if there was an incentive or an initiative from the production side, from the CMPA or from the PGA, to say, we want this technology, and we will go with the company that will provide us with this technology, regardless of how long your relationship with Whites or MBS or whomever else is. We're going to go where the clean tech is. That will incentivize all companies to have a supply, so that the prices eventually will start to come down, hopefully faster rather than later, and we can move more quickly into that realm where if you want 6 battery generators, they're available to you, as opposed to we've got one, we'll have to bring one from Halifax, which creates a footprint in and of itself. Yeah. So organize, get petitions going, hit the companies that are supplying you with equipment and say, we want more, and we want it now, and we will pay maybe a teeny bit if we have to, and maybe there's some kind of subsidization that can happen through, whether it's government assistance like COVID. Government spent $40 million supporting producers with their COVID costs. Maybe there's something like that.
Okay, thank you, David.
So good. Couldn't agree more.
Do we have time? Sorry, do I have time for another question? I'm just looking at the back. Okay, 2 more minutes. There's someone up here at the front, so please.
Do you want a mic?
I was going to say, so when you said water bottles, did you mean plastic water bottles? Mm-hmm. Okay. But I was going to say, what do you guys think has caused, the change in wanting to do this? Because, I don't know, maybe your whole life y'all wanted to do, be sustainable with if you wanted to make films. But do you think it's, a cultural shift in, wanting to be more sustainable when it comes to the filmmaking process? Or just in life in general?
For me, I started before COVID thinking about how can we change just because of my values. And then when COVID hit, everything had to be packaged, everything had to be, and the film I've done while COVID was on, it was just terrible. I had to close my eyes with all the garbages that we were producing. It was hurtful in a way, because all the good habits were there, and it just really went away quickly, very quickly, with the crews and the cast. And so on La Meurthe, it was a possibility to start producing again in a different way. And I think that's why after COVID, it's so easy to make change, because we were all witnessing terrible garbages. It was just, for sure, our carbon footprint was very high.
That's a good point. That's such a double-edged thing. I agree with what you're saying. It showed 2 things: how fast we can completely change how we our practices, and
lose good habits.
Yeah, that's right. Both things.
Okay.
Can I just say one last thing about that? No?
Kenny, 1 minute.
Just in terms of what's changed, I think what really changed and compared to other industries, because a lot of other industries have been trying to follow sustainable practices, or saying that they are for a number of decades. But what's changed in the last 3 years is that studies like this, reports that have been public, and all of a sudden there's been data because no one sat in front of their entertainment and thought about the carbon footprint. There was talk about water bottles because people could see the water bottles, but no one saw the emissions footprint and the total environmental footprint until people started tracking it. And so 3 years ago, we had our first report that said, this is our impact and this is where it is. And so all of a sudden the conversation shifted from, okay, we need to keep talking about water bottles, but we really need to be talking about our emissions. And that's really as a result of that.
I did a movie with Woody Harrelson a few years ago, and he is a serious environmentalist, and he went around to every car, all the transport guys idling the cars, just sitting there, and knocked on the window and said, "Hi, I'm Woody Harrelson. Can you please turn off your car?"
Well, that's a great thing to end on. So thank you very much, Tyler, Félize, Dan, and Andrew. Thank you.